The soul is startled by sudden realizations of the wickedness in which she has found herself. She is pierced with pain and sees no remedy. Recollecting past prosperity only intensifies the grief. Souls who enter the night of the Spirit have already enjoyed many delights in God and have served Him with great dedication along the path. Their sorrow is all the greater when they realize how far they are from such goodness now. They despair of ever being able to enter that realm again. Even if it is true that she is very fortunate to have arrived in this place where so many blessings are born, the soul God places in the stormy night of the Spirit deserves compassion. Job understands that. He says, God raises up out of the darkness profound blessings in the soul and turns the shadow of death into light. And David knows that his light will come to be what his darkness was. Still, the soul suffers terrible pain and is thoroughly dubious about a cure. She believes, says Jeremiah, that there is no end to her troubles. And she feels, says David, that God has hung her in the darkness like the dead of a long ago, her spirit in turmoil within her and her heart deeply disturbed. Added to this pain and suffering is the fact that the soul finds no solace or support in any doctrine or spiritual teacher. This dark night brings solitude and desolation with it. Even though her guides may point out many good reasons for the soul to take comfort in the great blessings signified by her suffering, she cannot believe them. Absorbed and engulfed by awful feelings, clearly discerning her own misery, the soul believes that her teachers say these hopeful things because they do not see and feel what she is seeing and feeling, and so cannot possibly understand her. Rather than being consoled by their efforts, her suffering is intensified. She knows there is no hope, no cure, no release from affliction. And in truth, there is no way out. Until God finishes purifying the soul in the way that He desires to do, no remedy can heal her, nor is there relief for her pain. She feels even more helpless when she realizes how little she can do to help herself. She is as powerless as someone imprisoned in a dark dungeon, bound hand and foot, unable to move, who cannot see or feel any favor from above or below. She remains like this until her spirit is humbled, softened, and purified, until she becomes so subtle, so simple, and so refined that she can become one with the Spirit of God, in proportion to the degree of union in love that the Beloved, in His mercy, wishes to grant her. The purification is of greater or lesser force and endures for a longer or shorter time. But if it is authentic, it will last for a number of years, however intense it may be. In this process, God grants intervals of relief, in which the dark contemplation ceases to batter the soul with purgation, and instead shines lovingly upon her with illumination. This is when the soul becomes like the one who has been released from the dungeon and brought up into spaciousness and freedom. She feels a great sweetness of peace and loving friendship with God. She feels the easy flow of abundance and spiritual connection with Him. The soul takes illumination as a sign of the health purgation is bestowing upon her and a foretaste of the plenitude she is hoping for. Sometimes this experience is so profound that the soul thinks all her tribulations must be finished. When the spiritual things that touch the soul are most purely spiritual, they have this extreme quality. When the soul is in trouble, she feels like she will never get out of it, and thus all her blessings are over. When spiritual blessings come, it seems to the soul that everything difficult is done and that she will never again lack blessings. David reports, "In my abundance, I said, I shall never be moved." We see that after David's time of prosperity, during which he declared that he would never be moved, he was indeed moved by many ills and pains. So it is with the soul in the night of spirit. When she finds herself stirred by abundance of spiritual blessings, the root of imperfection and impurity still within her becomes invisible, and she may think that her trial is ended, but this thought is rare. Until the spiritual purification is complete, that delicious communion is hardly ever so bountiful that it fully covers up the remaining root. The soul will not cease to feel deep inside herself that something is missing or still needs to be done. This keeps her from relaxing in sweet relief. She feels as if there were an enemy hushed and sleeping within her who might at any moment wake up and wreak havoc. This is just what happens. When the soul feels most secure and least expects it, purgation drops down upon her all over again and immerses her in yet a deeper degree of darkness, more severe and wrenching than ever before. This one may endure even longer than the last one. Once again, the soul believes that all blessings are forever over. Even though the soul basked in bounty after her last trial, convinced she would never suffer again, the experience is not enough to lead her to believe that this second degree of anguish will ever lift, or that blessings will ever return. Remember, this powerful conviction arises from the actual perception of the spirit, which annihilates within it everything contrary to that belief. The soul in this purification is so in love with God that she would give 1,000 lives for Him. Yet this brings her no relief. In fact, it only deepens her pain. Loving God so intensely that nothing else matters, she sees herself as so wretched that God could not possibly love her back. She believes that she neither has nor will ever have within herself anything worthy of His love. It torments her to survey all the reasons why she deserves to be rejected by Him who she so unequivocally loves and longs for. Chapter 8. Other pains that afflict the soul in this state. Since the dark night is an impediment to the faculties and affections, the soul cannot even lift her thoughts and feelings up to God. She cannot pray. It seems to the soul as it did to Jeremiah, that God has placed a cloud in front of me through which prayer may not pass. If the soul does try to pray, she prays with so little energy and juice that she doubts God can even hear her or is paying attention to her. The truth is, this is no time to talk to God. Instead, the soul should, as Jeremiah recommends, put her mouth in the dust, that there may come to her some actual hope. She must suffer her purification patiently. It is God who is now working in the soul passively. She herself can do nothing. She cannot pray or attend to any spiritual things. She is even less successful in dealing with worldly business. She sometimes slips into such altered states and such profound forgetfulness that long periods can pass during which the soul has no idea what she is thinking or doing, nor does she know what she is going to do next. No matter how much she may want to, she cannot focus on the task at hand. Not only is the mind purged of its light and the will of its attachments, but the memory is stripped of cognitive content. David says, "I was annihilated and I knew not." The unknowing refers to these confusions and lapses of memory. The distraction and absent-mindedness is caused by the interior recollection in which contemplation is absorbing the soul. The duration of withdrawal from creature perceptions and spirit attachments corresponds to the intensity of the contemplation. The more simply and purely the divine light strikes the soul, the more radically it eradicates her particular attachments to and perceptions of things above and things of below. The less purely this light shines, the less it darkens and deprives the soul. Like the ray of light that remains invisible even in the middle of a room as long as it has nothing to bump up against, so this divine light is invisible to the purified soul, and she thinks she is in darkness. Yet when this spiritual light strikes the soul and finds something to reflect, the soul sees and understands herself much more clearly than she did before she entered these dark places. It does not matter if her spiritual insight is tiny or vast, or if it is about perfection or imperfection, if it is a judgment of truth or illusion. Easily recognizing her own limitations, the soul can now clearly perceive spiritual light. The light is so simple, so pure, so sweeping. No particular thing in the intellect, either natural or divine, affects it or restricts it. The faculties of the soul have been emptied and annihilated of all such apprehensions. Now, with great ease and plenitude, the soul perceives and penetrates anything that is offered to her from above or below. The Apostle says that the spiritual person sees into all things unto the deepest things of God. With simple general wisdom, it touches everywhere because of its purity, says the wise man. The divine spirit cannot be particularized by any desire or object in the mind. Chapter 9. Although this night darkens the spirit, it illumines and fills her with light. Even though this holy night darkens the spirit, it does so only to light up everything. Even though it humbles her and makes her miserable, it is only to raise her up and exalt her. Even though it impoverishes her, emptying her of natural inclinations, it is only so that she will reach out for the divine and freely enjoy the fruits of all things of above and below. For elements to blend into compounds and natural entities, they have to be devoid of any particular color, fragrance, or flavor. Only then can they commingle with all the flavors, fragrances, and colors. The spirit, too, must be simple, pure, and naked of all attachments. Only then can she freely partake, with fullness of spirit, of the divine wisdom. Through her purity she tastes the eminent sweetness of all things. Without this purification, she would be unable to feel or taste the delectability of these abundant spiritual delights. Bound by even one remaining attachment to any particular object, and she will be incapable of feeling or tasting the subtle and intimate sweetness of the spirit of love, which holds within itself all sweetness. And so, if the soul is going to pass into this greatness, the dark night of contemplation has to annihilate her first. Her inferior tendencies must come undone. The night sets her down in darkness and aridity, in emptiness and strife. The light she will ultimately be given is the highest degree of divine light. It utterly transcends the soul's natural light. It has no home in the intellect. For the mind to reach the divine light and meld with it, and, in a state of perfection, to become divine, the dark contemplation must first obliterate its natural light. The mind has to be plunged into darkness. This darkness will last as long as it needs to pull the mind up out of those old ruts it has been stuck in for so long. Then the illumination of divine light can take over. Since the old ways of understanding were natural to the mind, the darkness of the soul endures here will be especially profound and painful. It seems impenetrable. The soul feels this darkness in the deepest substance of her spirit. The love that the divine union will pour upon the soul is divine love. It is very subtle, delicate, and spiritual. It is interior. It surpasses every feeling and inclination of the will and overrides every desire. And so the will, too, must first be purged of all feelings and preferences before it can taste the divine sweetness and the exalted delight of the union of love, which does not belong to the will. The soul is thoroughly tempered by the fire of this dark contemplation, cleansed of every kind of demon, like the heart of the fish Tobias set on the coals. Her disposition is purified and simplified. Her palate is purged and healed so that it can taste the sublime and wondrous textures of divine love. All obstacles are driven out. The soul is transformed. Connection with God fills the soul with a certain splendor and glory. She overflows with blessings springing from delights that far surpass any she could attain naturally. This is the stuff of union. This is where the dark night is leading the soul. This is what it is getting her ready for. The natural being is not pure enough or strong enough to receive these delights. Isaiah says, "Eye has not seen, nor has ear heard, nor has it entered into the heart of humanity that which God has prepared." And so the soul is brought first into emptiness and poverty of spirit. She is purged of every natural support, consolation, and perception from above or from below. Only then, radically empty, stripped naked of the old self, is she truly poor of spirit. Only then can she live that new and blessed life. This is the dark night. This is what yields union with God. This night draws the spirit away from her customary feeling for things. It brings her a sense of the divine. This is alien to human ways. Her suffering seems to transport her beyond herself. Sometimes the soul even wonders if she might be under a spell, captivated. She wanders around amazed by the things she sees and hears. Everything seems so peculiar even though nothing has really changed. This is because the soul is becoming a stranger to herself. She does not have access to common sense or ordinary knowledge anymore. Thus annihilated, she can be informed by the divine. This is a thing belonging more to the next life than to this one. The soul suffers the pain of spiritual purification so that she can be quickened by the divine inflow and regenerated in the life of the Spirit. As Isaiah says, "By your presence, Lord, we have conceived and we have been as in the pains of labor, and we have brought forth the spirit of salvation." The soul needs to give up on the peace of her past. The night of contemplation is preparing her for inner tranquility so exquisite that, as the scriptures say, it surpasses all understanding. That other peace was really no peace at all because it was shrouded in imperfections. It only seemed that way to a soul following her own inclinations. She felt like she had in fact attained a double peace, peace of sense and peace of spirit. She saw herself filled with holy abundance, but this sensual and spiritual peace is still imperfect and needs to be purified. It must be shattered and swept away. It is a painful upheaval, stirring up a myriad of fears and delusions that battle inside the soul. Perception of the misery in which she finds herself leads the soul to suspect that she is hopelessly lost and that all blessings, too, are lost forever. The sorrowing and sighing of her spirit are so profound that they turn into a mighty roaring and bellowing. She is so powerfully racked by pain that sometimes she cries out and dissolves in tears, if she even still has the strength needed for weeping. This kind of relief, however, is a rare thing. Such is the work this night does inside the soul. It covers up all hope for the light of day. The battle within her is deep, just as the peace she is waiting for will be deep. Her pain private and delicate, because the love she will have is just as intimate and refined. The more masterful a work of art, the more careful must be the labor. The energy committed to construction is reflected in the solidity of a building. In her journey through this purifying night, the soul will eventually come to enjoy a state of perfection overflowing with countless gifts and virtues. But first, she is required to suffer the general withdrawal and deprivation of these wonders. This makes her feel empty and impoverished. It is absolutely necessary for the soul to see herself as so far removed from these wonderful things that she cannot possibly persuade herself they will ever come back to her. All she can believe, like Jeremiah, that everything excellent is over. I'm skipping to chapter 11 now. Inflamed by love longing. The soul is singing about the fire of love. In this night of painful contemplation, the soul is ignited. This is a love that blazes in the spirit. In the middle of her dark predicament, the soul feels herself vividly wounded by the flaming blade of divine love, and she is stirred by an inkling of God's presence, even though her mind sits in darkness and she does not understand anything. This spiritual conflagration arouses love's passion, and the spirit finds herself madly in love with God. This is an infused love. It is an action of God working on the soul passively. It enters and takes hold of her, although the soul gives this love her consent. It is the love of God drawing the soul toward union with Him. It kindles the heated mood of love, which the soul calls fire. All the soul's old desires have been incapacitated and shut down. She is incapable of being satisfied by anything of heaven or of earth. When this love shows up in the soul, it finds her ready to be wounded and united with love itself. In this dark purification, God weans the soul from all other cravings by withdrawing them and gathering them all inside Himself. In this way, He strengthens the soul so that she is better equipped to receive the powerful union of divine love. Through burning purification, God is beginning to give this love to the soul, and the soul is beginning to love Him in return with tremendous force, engaging her purest sensual and spiritual desires. Such love is only possible when the appetites are no longer scattered by their inclination toward any other thing. That is, there is no other object of pleasure than Him. Consider how vast and mighty this fire of love is that burns in the spirit. God collects all the functions of the soul, sensual and spiritual, and commits the power and virtue of this harmonious whole to the flames of love. And so the soul, not excluding for a minute anything human from this love, truly fulfills the first commandment. You shall love your God with all your soul and all your heart and all your mind and all your strength. Once the soul has been struck and wounded by this burning love, all her energies and desires are driven into this single passion. The soul can tell that she is seriously wounded and lit on fire by this powerful love, but she still cannot grasp it or get any satisfaction from it. She remains in darkness and doubt. As David says, the soul is like a starving dog wandering around the city, howling and moaning, yearning to be filled with love. The touch of this divine love dries up the spirit and enkindles the soul. The urge to satisfy her thirst for God is so strong that she turns 1,000 circles inside herself and yearns for Him in 1,000 ways. My soul thirsts for you. In how many ways does my soul long for you? Says David in Psalm. Another version, my soul thirsts for you. My soul loses itself and dies for you. And so the soul says in this line that she is inflamed by the longings of love in everything she does, in all the thoughts revolving inside her, in all her activities and every event that arises, in her desire and in the suffering that comes from desire. The soul is loving God all the time, everywhere. She does not find peace anywhere. She feels this longing like an inflamed wound. Job says, "If I lie down to sleep, I say, when will I get up? Then I wait till evening, and I am filled with sorrows until the dark of night." Everything cramps the soul. She does not fit inside herself. She does not fit in heaven or on earth. She is lost in sorrow until the spiritual darkness falls, which is what Job is talking about. The agony is not mollified by one shred of hope for any spiritual light or for anything good whatsoever. This burning love compounds the soul's suffering by engulfing her in spiritual darkness and plaguing her with doubts and fears, by inflaming, stimulating, and stirring her with a wondrous wound of love. Isaiah says, "My soul desired you in the night," that is, in misery. Yet within my spirit, he goes on to say, at my deepest core, until the morning, I will wait for you, which expresses the anxiety of love longing. Still, in the middle of dark grief, the soul senses a certain companion deep inside herself. This present keeps the soul company and fortifies her. In fact, if her burden of painful darkness was removed, the soul would feel alone, empty, and weak. The power and value of the soul came to her when she was besieged by the dark fire of love. When the siege lifts, the darkness, potency, and heat of love fall away, and the soul feels like she's left with nothing, bereft. Skipping to chapter 13. Remember, it takes a while for the fire of love to catch. The soul might not feel it when the spiritual night first falls. But from the very outset of this night, the soul is touched by love longings. Sometimes this is felt as deep regard. At other times it is a burning passion. From the beginning, God awakens in the soul, at the very least, a singular esteem for Him. This reverence can be so intense that the most severe trials and tribulations of the night arise from the soul's anguish in thinking that she has lost God and that He has abandoned her. It seems that the greatest suffering the soul undergoes here is this very fear. If only the soul could be sure that all is not lost, that her suffering is for the best, and that God is not mad at her, then all this pain would not even bother her. Instead, the soul would rejoice in the knowledge that God is making good use of her. Her loving esteem for God is so great that the soul would actually be happy to suffer all these things, in fact, to die over and over again just to please Him. When the fire of love joins with the esteem the soul already feels for God, the warmth of love strengthens her and makes her brave. It intensifies her longing for Him. She would do whatever it took, no matter how crazy, to encounter the one she loves. The power of love and desire intoxicates her and makes her bold. The soul would do anything for God, oblivious to any potential consequences. Mary Magdalene, in spite of her past, paid no attention to the men at the banquet. It made no difference to her if they were prominent or common. She did not consider whether it was proper to go sobbing and shedding tears among the guests. Her only concern was to reach the one who had wounded her soul and set it on fire. No, she could not wait for a more appropriate time. The intoxication of love gives the soul crazy courage. The power and intensity of love have this quality. Love makes everything seem possible. Love believes everyone must feel this same passion. Love cannot understand how anyone would waste their time doing anything other than seeking the beloved. This is the power of love longing. Once the soul has advanced in spiritual purification, in the darkness of night, the wounded soul rises up in response to the affections of the will. Like a lioness or a she-bear that goes looking for her lost cubs, the wounded soul goes anxiously forth in search of her God. In darkness, she feels only His absence. She feels like she is dying with love for Him. In fact, such is the nature of this impatient love that she cannot endure one more minute without either gaining the object of her desire or dying. This is the yearning Rachel had for children when she said to Jacob, "Give me children, otherwise I will die." Even though in the midst of this purifying darkness the soul considers herself to be wretched and unworthy, she still has the energy and daring to go out and find union with God. Love gives the soul strength to love truly, and it is love's nature to seek to be connected to, made equal with, and assimilated into the object of love, and to be perfected in love's goodness. The soul that has not yet achieved perfection in the union of love hungers and thirsts for what she still lacks. The power of love impassions the will and makes it bolder. But the mind is not yet illumined and remains in darkness. The soul still feels miserable. Why doesn't this divine light, which is always radiance to the soul, Illumine the soul the instant it strikes her, but instead causes darkness and difficulty. Remember, the darkness and wickedness the soul experiences when the light strikes her are not caused by the light. They belong to the soul herself. What the light is doing is illuminating her so that she can see her imperfections. And this light illumines her from the very beginning. At first, however, she can only see what is nearest to her, in fact, what is inside of her, which is the shadow of her own misery. It is by grace of God that she gets to perceive this now. She did not see these things before because the supernatural light had not yet shone on her like this. It is only early on that the soul feels this darkness and insignificance. After being purified by the realization of these things, the soul will have eyes to see the great blessings of the divine light. Once all the soul's shadows and impurities are driven out, the tremendous benefits she is gaining through this sweet night of contemplation become clearer. God grants the soul in this state the favor of cleansing and healing her. He washes clean both sense and spirit with the bitter solvent of purification. By darkening the interior faculties and emptying them of all objects, God frees the soul from her imperfect inclinations towards sensory and spiritual things. He restrains the natural forces of the soul so that they weaken and dry up. He refines them. No soul can accomplish this work by herself. In this way, God makes the soul die to all that is not inherently of God. When the soul is stripped bare of her old skin, God clothes her afresh. Her youth is revitalized like the eagle's. She is clothed in newness of being. She is created, as the Apostle says, according to God. It is nothing less than illumination of the natural mind by supernatural light, so that, through union with what is divine, the mind too becomes divine. It is nothing less than an infusing of the will with the love of God, so that it is no longer other than divine itself, and, made one with the divine will and love, loves divinely. It is nothing less than a divine conversion and alteration of the memory, the inclinations, and the desires, so that they conform to God's. And so this soul will be a soul of heaven, heavenly, more divine than human. God does all this good work in the soul by enkindling her love longing for God alone.